Earlier today, Blackmagic released the Blackmagic Studio Camera 6K Pro, and today I'm going to talk about why it is such an amazing camera. So first off, let me give you some of my background. I have done a lot with broadcast, especially in churches, and I have had extensive usage with the Blackmagic Ursa Broadcast G2 and the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. I am currently filming right now on my Blackmagic Pocket 6K. Now, the thing that kind of unifies all of these three cameras, the Pocket, the Ursa, and this new studio camera, is they all share the same sensor. So all these cameras should look the same if all things are equal. They share the same sensor, and they all can have EF lens mounts. Now, the Ursa cameras have a lot of flexibility, and that's kind of their main thing. You can put them on a shoulder mount, you can add a viewfinder, you can put a big 7-inch display on the back. They have a flip-out display, they have a bunch of cool features, and they support V-mount batteries, and they're just an amazingly flexible camera that should work for any scenario. The problem is that they're very big and expensive. The Blackmagic Ursa Broadcast G2 is a little over $4,000, so not the cheapest of cameras. But the image quality is the same as the Pocket cameras and the Blackmagic Studio Camera 6K Pro, which was just released. Now, there are some benefits to the image quality that these cameras have over the original Pockets, and that is that the new studio camera and the Ursa Broadcast G2 have ND filters, and that's great for shooting outdoors if you want to have a really low aperture and still have it exposed properly. Now, a benefit with this new studio camera is that it has motorized ND filters, which the Ursa does not. Now, the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro does have that as well, so that's a cool feature, and if you want that, well, that camera's there at a little bit more expensive, but it's actually at the same price as the studio camera at $2,500. So they're same price, but the cinema camera and this new studio camera, as well as the Ursa, have very different use cases. So for the cinema cameras, as for video production, like you're going to be filming a video or a movie and you want a camera that can record internally, has internal batteries, has everything built in. Versus with live production, you don't need to record internally. Now, these cameras can do that, but they don't have internal memory slots. Now, the Ursa does, but the studio cameras do not. Again, the Ursa is like the king of all traits when it comes to flexibility. It can do anything that the other cameras that they have can do, except for the 12K resolution of the really fancy one. But that isn't really necessary because all these cameras can do 6K anyway. And 6K is, I feel like, a good middle ground. It's not 8K, but it's not 4K, so you have more flexibility that way. And all these cameras record in B-RAW, which is an amazing format. I love B-RAW a lot. But when you're in a live environment, you need a lot of inputs and outputs and talkback controls and stuff like that that can be controlled by the switcher. And that's where this studio camera really shines versus the Pocket cameras. It has that sensor and the quality of the Pockets, but it has the flexibility, well, at least for some of the flexibility, for live environments like the Ursa Broadcast does. So it has the XLR inputs and the 5-pin headphone output for broadcast headsets, and it has Ethernet power, delivery, and signal out. You can tether it to a phone, all that kind of cool stuff that the Ursa has, and actually some more features that the Ursa does not have. So for example, I just said that the Ethernet control. That is an amazing feature because with just one cable you can run power to the camera, signal to the camera and back for your camera control, and everything just goes through one cable. It's an amazing thing. It's basically like the analog version of the optical cables for the Ursa cameras. Now that's a whole different story, and those are much better, but they're also much more expensive, around $2,500 for each part of that system. It's way out of the price range of these studio cameras. And that's kind of what they're for, is for lower budget live productions and stuff like that, studios, that you want the flexibility of the Ursas, but you don't want to spend the money of the Ursas. And these cameras really have a lot of value that way. They also have, unlike any of the other Blackmagic cameras, all of the models have a 7-inch touchscreen, which if you want a 7-inch screen on any of the other cameras, so like the Pockets have a 5-inch touchscreen, and the Ursas have I think a 3.5 or 4-inch touchscreen, so it's a little bit small. For example, when I was using the Ursa, we ended up getting the external viewfinder, the G2, the super bright one, and that is the same size as these built-in monitors, but it isn't a touchscreen, so we didn't have that control. Now, the Ursa does have the flip-out screen, which is nice, and That build is better and everything's better about that. But for this camera, the Blackmagic Studio Camera 6K Pro, to have all of these features that the Ursa has, almost all of the features, and have the built-in 7-inch display, and have all that stuff that you would want for live production, to only be $2,500 is quite amazing considering the competition and even Blackmagic's own cameras. For example, the Blackmagic Studio Camera 4K Plus and 4K Pro G2, which is also released today, they offer a lot of the same features, but to have that 6K sensor on this new 6K camera, that is an amazing deal, in my opinion. As well as having the EF mount, instead of Micro Four Thirds, gives a lot more flexibility when using lenses. Now, for example, I use a lot of Sigma lenses with my Blackmagic cameras, and they pair really well with these cameras. Now, the downside is with the Blackmagic Studio Camera series is that they do not support, well, not natively at least, B4 mount. So if you want to have B4 lenses, you can't really use that. But if you're buying B4 lenses, you have the budget probably for a Ursa camera, and they perform better anyway with those. Now, you can get adapters, but they're pretty expensive. So EF, or if you can get an adapter for RF or maybe a Sony E-mount, they should cover most of your needs. B4 mount gives you the most flexibility with those lenses, but they're super expensive. And I'm glad they stayed with EF instead of RF. There are new RF lenses that are better, but there are so many good EF lenses out there that I think EF is the better option. Now, I'm not going to go over all the features that this new camera has because it shares almost all of its features with the older studio cameras, as well as the Blackmagic Pockets or the Ursa Broadcasts. It's kind of like a mashup between the cinema cameras and the Ursas. So it's really an incredible camera for the price because it has everything you would need for live and everything you don't need for cinema. Now, if you want to record videos, you can do that and have the same quality as the Blackmagic cinema cameras and the Ursas. You just have to use an external drive, which I usually use anyway because it's so much cheaper than CFast cards or SD cards that can support those 6K B-RAW files. So here's a quick montage shot on my Blackmagic Pocket 6K to give you some perspective on this sensor. Now, I know this camera is different than the one that was released today, but they share the same sensors and the same lenses, so it should give you a pretty good feel about how this camera will look. So here's that montage. Okay, that's pretty much it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. That would help me out a lot. I'm trying to get to 400 subscribers by the end of the month, and I believe I only need about 42 more. So almost there. If you want to become a Patreon, there's a link in the description below to my Patreon page if you want to support me that way. That would help me out a lot. And if you do that, your name will get mentioned at the end of every video. And as always, if you have any questions about any of the gear I use, please leave it in the comments below and I will answer your question. Well, that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Also, what do you think of this audio setup? I moved it from above me to below me to be a lot closer. There were some other noises that were happening in the room and above this room, so does this sound better? Is it too bad to be in the shot? What are your opinions? Leave them in the comments below. I love to know.